So I was teaching English to 4 to 11-year-olds, up to 30 people in the class. I was like really nice to everyone and they just walked all over me. I had no control of this class. So then I was super strict and they were even worse like that. What I ended up getting to was like, if we just had real mutual respect and I listened, we got things done. We were on the same team. And honestly, that's absolutely how I approach the many different types of people I work with and the many different teams I've been thrown into.
Welcome back to Horizons Podcast, where I convince marketing leaders to spill their secrets for the rest of us. I'm your host, Nate Desmond. And today I'm thrilled to be joined by Kari Ostevik. Kari has been leading product at startups that have raised a combined $500 million after getting her degree in mechanical engineering. And she has a very unique perspective to share with us as she led growth at one of her previous startups after the CMO left the company. I'm curious because I've worked at Google for most of my career, which is a very product-led organization. When you're in a place that's not product-led, who have you found is normally leading the company, and how have you bought a stake at that table?
Yeah, so I have worked for 2 B2B SaaS companies that have been around for a long time, and so are very sales-led. I mean, definitely leaning on data is very important. Salespeople can have, I feel like often decisions are made by like who's the loudest customer or even who's the loudest salesperson. And so as a product team trying to change that, it is about like doing the groundwork, like doing proper user interviews, looking at whatever data you can have, and creating a story to show that we should maybe be working on these features instead of the ones that sales had originally asked for. And then at the same time, it's really important to be working with those salespeople and marketing people so that we are all on the same page of like, how are we going to sell this? How are we going to market this once it's actually built?
That's really interesting. And it's strikingly similar to how I've approached it for marketing. I also tend to take an approach of, if I'm trying to buy a place at the decision-making table as marketing, how can I bring data and user insights to earn that right to make a point in our product roadmap? So that's interesting that you've often seen similarly. What did you find were the key differences between leading product and growth at more of a B2B company like the game studio or Bupos versus on more of a consumer side company?
Now that I work at a B2B SaaS company again, I like listen to a lot of Gong recordings and like look through Salesforce data, which when you're at a B2C consumer facing company, like there aren't as many sales calls and you're looking more at behavior. I think you're obviously still doing like in-depth user interviews, but it is a different sort of conversation than when you're talking to your current customers or prospects that the sales team feels a bit nervous about you talking to. Whereas a consumer product, you can go talk to your friends on the street. At Credit Sesame, we did guerrilla testing. We would just walk down to Market Street and ask people questions right there.
What would you say is the difference between looking at a Gong report, which could you just briefly explain what is a Gong report and how do you analyze it? What's the difference between looking at Gong report and doing more of these on the street interviews?
Gong is the tool that a couple of the companies I've worked for have used to record their sales calls. And so you're watching how your salespeople are demoing the product or sales engineers are demoing the product. So if there's an issue with the product or an escalation, you can watch like what is the pain point that that user is talking about. And then guerrilla testing is more like, since everyone can grasp what Credit Sesame is, it's a free credit score website, you can go down to the street and ask people to look at mock-ups or like click through a clickable prototype to get feedback right away.
And getting really tactical when you're watching these sales calls, how often would you come away with a new idea for what you wanted to do in the product versus just have a better understanding of the priorities maybe that you already have?
I would say if you have a good communication channel with your sales team, they're pretty good at letting you know what's important. I'm not the type of product person that's like, I have to come up with all the good ideas, it's great to get ideas from those people that are talking to the customers all the time. The Gong recordings are more to like get to know your users, and maybe a salesperson has pointed you in that direction. Whereas when I'm doing direct customer interviews based on a subject, I do feel like because I get to dig into those pain points a little bit more, it gives me a better basis to come up with a solid solution.
And it's interesting to me. I was reading a book recently about improv. And one of the points the book made is that very often as humans, we're trying to look for a clever idea. And part of what it takes to be a good improver is to stop looking for a clever idea and just take the ideas that are there. And then you find out actually those ideas are great and often what the audience really wants to see. It kind of hear a similar echo in what you're talking about in hearing from the sales team, that there can be an inclination of, oh, let me go find something really cool and clever. But actually, the sales team might already have told you everything you needed to know.
Yeah. Or your customers, like people could be begging for things and product teams get distracted by their egos or like what the higher up people are saying. And yeah, it's right in front of you a lot of the time.
How do you go about prioritizing when you're thinking about the things you could build?
Two main methods. If I'm doing a lot of growth experiments, I love to use like a RICE matrix to evaluate risk, impact, confidence, and ease in more of a numerical way. More of my career has been centered around prioritizing larger features and then like smaller features within those larger features. And I prefer to use 2x2 matrix. The most common one for me is like ease and business value. When you get to that 2x2, talking through why you're putting something above something else or to the right of something else, I think is a really important practice.
Strong +1. I do a lot of even just what we call t-shirt sizing. Is this a small, medium, or large impact and small, medium, or large difficulty of doing it? And now a word from our sponsor. It's me. I'm actually not taking any sponsors in season 1, but I just wanted to say thank you for listening. It's been such a joy recording these episodes, and I hope you enjoy them as much as I have. If you would like to support the podcast, the single most impactful thing you can do is leave a 5-star review wherever you're listening. This will help new people discover the podcast. And if you have someone in your life who's passionate about marketing, send this their way. They'll probably love diving into these insider tactics and stories. With that, back to the conversation. Where have you seen the most unhelpful inputs from, say, a marketing team or a sales team in how they try to influence your prioritization? And what would you recommend we do differently?
So when I joined one of the companies I had worked for, they were still a bit old school, having a lot of top-down recommendations of what we should build. And the product management team wasn't used to doing what I believe is a huge part of product management, which is validating solutions and prioritizing. And so part of that is like educating that I have the skill set to do these things. I have schooling in how to conduct like strong user interviews, and I can look at data, and we should be looking at data. So that education part of it. But then often like I love working sessions. So getting a cross-functional team together to talk about what that prioritization should be in that 2x2. Then other people can hear each other. And I think the other really important thing is like doing those 5 whys.
The 5 whys are hard to do. I find I very rarely actually do more than like 1, but there's a lot of power in actually doing that. I'm curious, when you think about these working sessions, you mentioned like getting cross-functional people together, doing a workshop. I've seen some workshops that are really effective in that there are a lot of strong outcomes. It leads to actual change in the product or in the marketing or something in the company. And I've also seen workshops where nothing really happened afterwards and we sort of wrote it off as a waste of time. What have you found are the best practices that have worked well for you in bringing cross-functional teams together and building a roadmap?
Some companies are really not used to working in like a working session sort of way and in like an organized way. So it really is just the most senior, the loudest person in the room. Those are the ideas that get pushed. And so a lot of the tools I add to workshops are around how do we help everyone be heard and be on the same page about how we're going to make decisions. One of the things I've learned to really appreciate is giving people heads down time in a meeting to leave comments. If you send people documents, do they actually read it? Are they going to read it on time? Not often in my experience. So giving people like that 5-10 minutes, sometimes I put on like lo-fi music sometimes. Then you get a number of comments from many different people, and people actually have to think it the full way through. I think that's one of the most important things. Also, just being prepared, saying what you're going to do, doing it, and then at the end, reiterating what did you do and what are the next steps. And then another thing I think about is keeping the energy up. When you read the Google Sprint book, it's like, take care of your people, make sure you're not running a 4-hour-long meeting, make sure they're fed and rested. And I try to keep it pretty short.
Love that piece you're saying about people may not read the pre-read. There's a great saying that I love where you say this meeting could have been an email, but then the addition to that is, but if it were an email, you wouldn't have read it. And it is really quite sure that often we need to be in a meeting to actually have that motivation to say, okay, I'm actually going to read this now and get into it. I'm curious with your application of, I think it was from Google Ventures, this workshop methodology. What have you found to be most helpful from that? And the reason I ask is I think for someone who's just getting into it, it is a little bit overwhelming. I pulled up the website, I looked at some of the steps. There's a lot of stuff going on there. What's the 80-20? What's the 20% that really matters?
I love parts of the Google Sprint. I've never run a week-long Google Sprint before. It's always just picking and choosing parts of it. I love getting people sketching. So once you have a direction, getting people to do crazy eights and storyboarding, it's just a really fast way to have a number of solutions that then you can go validate or prioritize.
And what is crazy eight?
Yeah, good question. Crazy eights is when I've done this a lot. You fold a piece of paper hot dog wise and then twice hamburger wise. And so you have 8 squares on your piece of paper. And then every minute you should be sketching a new solution to the problem that you've been assigned or you've picked. I have run it a number of different ways. Sometimes we all sketch on the same problem. Sometimes we're aligned on a solution and it's just, what does that solution actually look like? And then sometimes just get people to pick different parts of the user journey so that we have a number of solutions that we can put together for a larger product.
And this would be sketching like a specific user interface or more of a general, like I could use stick figures to draw a more generic solution to the problem?
Lots of different stuff comes out of these sessions. You can definitely draw stick figures. I think another thing I find really nice about the 2-step sketching process and brainstorming in general is that you want to have heads down brainstorming so that people don't get influenced by each other's ideas. So that can be crazy eights. And then you share those ideas. And then once you've heard everyone's, then you can storyboard. And so you're piling on ideas, taking the parts of it, but you're not just relying on groupthink or laziness.
Yeah. What would that look like tactically? So let's say you finished the crazy eights part of a workshop. You've got all these sketches. How do you get into storyboard?
What I normally do, I love to do this in a physical environment if possible. I use Miro a lot as well and get people just take pictures of what they've drawn. Some teams are all set up on like iPads and stuff like that, but most of the time it's not. So just get people to draw in a physical space, put it on the board. Everyone gets a couple minutes to describe their different variations. And then sometimes at this stage, I do dot voting. So again, this is a way to make sure we understand what people see as a strong solution or idea, but without influencing each other too much. And so you give people dot stickers, maybe 3, and they get to go put the stickies on the sketches that they think are really great. And then you often, Google Ventures Sprint says you should have a a decision maker, so you can give them a larger circle. I often don't have a decision maker in my sessions. It seems unnecessary a lot of the time.
I noticed across your career, there's a strong theme of integrating with Looker and Mixpanel and Heap and all these different tracking tools. How have you found the role of tracking and data analytics within your work as a product manager?
I actually just went to the Pendo conference in North Carolina like 2 weeks ago. So this is very top of mind. I love looking at behavioral data. I think it's so fun. More fun in B2C, I would say. Maybe that's just because I feel like I've had it better set up. I will say that I have worked one place where I felt like we were too data driven, and I'd love to hear how you feel about me saying that. But I'll just explain myself. Like, when you're so focused on meeting certain metrics in certain time frames, I think you can be a little bit short-sighted and lose like the holistic value prop of the product. And so we always need that balance of like having our strong vision and then checking it with data, but not ruining our user experience by just changing things that data tells us to change.
That is really an interesting area. I have seen, I think, a consistent theme in my work of incentive design, that you want to set an OKR or objective for your business, but there's very rarely a perfect objective. And most of the time you'll have unintended consequences of saying, like, for my coffee shop, I want to optimize for the number of cups that I serve, but that can actually encourage my staff to just go make cups for no reason and lay them out on the counter. And now I have wastage. Designing the right incentive and the right objective is really important. Coming back to, you mentioned Pendo, a conference in North Carolina. How do you stay connected to best practices in the industry?
Yeah, good question. Super important. I try to read my Teresa Torres weekly email and my Lenny product management email. And then I went to this Pendo conference, which I thought was great. I'm getting a bit tired of lecture-based conferences. And so there was a workshop portion of the Pendo one, which I really, really enjoyed. But I have a great product community or friends, and I try to meet up with them. It's great to go to meetups as well, but I find when I can talk to my peers that I really trust about my real current problems, that is the best way for me to keep up to date with best practices.
That's awesome. I'm taking notes here on how can I as a marketer better understand my product friends. So Teresa, Lenny, these seem like good sources to understand product. When you're meeting up with your other product people, what does that look like? Like, you just sit around and have dinner and talk about what's happening, or is it more structured? How do you approach that?
We've done it a couple of different ways. At one of them I did recently, we had dinner. We had this, I didn't organize this. One of my past colleagues invited 7 people to her house, and then she did have some set questions. So one of my favorite things we talked about was what is something you're struggling at work with right now, and how can we support you? So it's everything from, I have 6 reports and they're all depressed, how do I help, to how do I help the growth team when I'm a designer. I think it is great to have those starter questions of what are you struggling right now and how can we help?
Oh, I love that. It is often very simple, isn't it? You don't need some complicated framework. It's just sit down and talk. I'm curious, going back to your time at Credit Sesame, I think you had a team of 8 people across design and analysis and engineering that you were working with and that you're leading. What would you say are the key things you've learned in how to manage people well?
Yeah, and I mean, in that role, I was the product manager, so they're not actually my reports, but you spend much more time with them than their actual managers. And also creates this tricky situation that maybe marketers don't talk as much about, but product managers, we're always talking about how we're leading without authority. And that is a tricky place to be in. When I start with a new team, I try to have one-on-ones with everyone, and I say a couple of things. I want to ask them about their experience working with other product managers. There's many different types of product managers, and some people have really bad experiences, and I just have to set the stage that we're on the same team. I am a bit of an umbrella for you. Like, I see part of my job as making sure that you can do your job. The other thing that I think is really important is if you're going to take people's time, make sure that you have a plan for it and that there's a clear outcome. I like to make sure we have like a clear agenda, or like if we're workshopping something, clear activities that we're going to do. And then the other thing we talked about a little bit earlier is how connected is this team? How motivated are they? And I think bringing a little bit of fun and humor, trying to actually get to know people. Like in Canada, we love to talk about the weather, team bonding, making sure you're doing something fun. You don't always have to do that. Like if you have motivated people that are getting along, but not necessary. But I have been put into a number of teams that are, we're working remotely, not very connected.
Going back to earlier in your career, I believe your second job was teaching English in France while you were learning French. Do you feel like that experience has informed how you show up as a product lead?
100%. Yeah. So I went to do that because I graduated from mechanical engineering and then was a mechanical engineer and hated my life as a mechanical engineer. I'm not going to lie. So I was like, I'll go to France. Kind of wanted to move back to Montreal, which is where I did my undergrad. And my French still was not very good. So I was like, I'll think about my life and I'll learn French. But what I think I gained most out of that was how to manage a group of people. So I was teaching English to 4 to 11-year-olds, up to 30 people in the class, or kids in the class. I had like coached sports before and like worked with kids before, but my French was also not that good. And so the first thing I did was I was like really nice to everyone and they just walked all over me. I had no control of this class. So then I was super strict. I had like, and they were even worse like that. So what I ended up getting to was if we just had real mutual respect and I listened, we got things done. We were on the same team. And honestly, that's absolutely how I approach the many different types of people I work with and the many different teams I've been thrown into.
It's really interesting because I've also taught children, also English actually, here in Singapore. And I feel like they have less of a filter. If you're leading a team, they might be disconnected, they might not respect you, but they're not going to show that as obviously. Whereas children, like you said, are a little bit less filtered. They will show very quickly how they feel about the class and how comfortable they feel maybe acting out in the class. What have you found when you're managing up? So when you're looking at the CEO, the CPO, how do you manage in that direction?
I think most important thing is making sure they feel heard and you are excited about their suggestions and making sure you're like doing the work that you're asked, but also being clear about how you're going to do that work. And if you're often it's getting an idea and having to validate it and then report back on that, just being clear that like, oh yeah, like being excited and then going to do the work and bringing data back to say, yes, 100%, this is a great idea, or could still be a great idea. This is what I found. Where are you at now?
That makes sense. And it almost feels to me like this fits well with communicating value to non-technical people, that they might not understand all that goes into the work you do, but they can understand the value of, okay, this is important for these reasons, and I can see the progress being made. We have one last section of questions. This is our lightning round. And I'm going to throw some questions at you. Feel free to expound on your answer if you want to, or just give a quick answer to each one. Product-led or marketing-led growth?
I think we should be on the same page. And I think those terms can be very, like, I think the line between product and marketing can be so different between companies too.
NPS or customer satisfaction score?
I like NPS, but I don't have a strong reason for why.
Very reasonable. Data or intuition?
Data.
Build or buy?
Oh, it depends.
Technical?
I will actually say build versus buy. I think the role of a PM is shifting towards more of your job is evaluating build versus buy because there's just so many more products than there were 10 years ago.
I would add, as someone who dabbles in a little bit of coding on the side, it is insane to me how quickly these recurring subscriptions for like, oh, this tracking thing, this analytics thing, it adds up so fast. It's insane. Technical or non-technical PM background?
I've seen great both. And even like with my background of being a mechanical engineer, like I don't even really know where I fit in there. People have different strong opinions about that.
B2B or B2C product management?
I like to switch it up.
Beta programs or soft launches?
Beta.
Now with that is our interview. Where can people go to find out more about you and follow along for more learning from you?
Happy to answer any questions people have on LinkedIn. You can add me there. Yeah, that's probably the best way.
Awesome. I'll make sure your LinkedIn is in the show notes and in the YouTube below. So check it out. Connect with Kari there. Thank you for making the time.